Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to the Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, one of the co-hosts, and we have a very special guest with us today, Randy Walton. Randy, thanks for being on the program.
Jeff, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we always do just a brief intro. Randy is a speaker, consultant, leadership expert, I would add author, who's been advising leaders and executive teams for over 25 years. I mean, he gives advice. We were just talking offline. He gives advice for a living. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I know he's got a million stories to tell. And Randy, we usually just jump in by just talking about where you grew up, what your family was like, that kind of stuff, just for some background.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida. Actually born in Daytona Beach, Florida. So not a lot of native Floridians these days, it seems like, but I was actually came by it honestly. And had kind of a very traditional sort of upbringing in home life. My dad, he worked for the phone company and started off, drove a truck, and then later was moved into some management roles. And mom was there full time with us, and I was the middle of three boys. And it was, sort of the I don't know, stereotypical upbringing. Played outside till the street light came on. Kickball and sports and riding our bikes everywhere and all this sort of, very kind of traditional sort of upbringing, I guess you'd say. Not a lot of drama, that sort of thing. So very blessed in that regard.
I don't know. There was probably a little bit of drama between three boys, though, and you being in the middle. Does that make you the peacemaker? What is the stereotypical middle child personality, and are you that?
That's a funny question, because I've raised a few kids myself, and you do ask that question, right?
Right.
Peacemaker. I'm probably a little bit of hybrid. I think I'm only 13 months younger than my older brother, and so they were close enough that in some ways it was a little bit of a flip, where I was a little bit more first child like. But yeah, I think I did learn a certain amount of how to be the diplomat, but I at the same time I was pretty good at talking myself into trouble, and maybe I learned how to be a consultant by talking myself out of it after the fact. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought too much about it for myself. I thought about it a lot more when we were raising our kids.
How many kids do you have?
I have three.
Okay, so daughters. How do you think about your middle kids?
She was. I wouldn't have said she was the peacemaker, but I would say that she definitely was probably the most adaptive.
Right.
She's had that ability to sort of figure out how to fit into the roles and do things. And I hadn't really thought about it, but now that I think about it, it's probably what happened to me. You learn to be adaptive, and that's a good skill as a consultant, because that's your whole life, is figuring out how to sort of mesh into other places that aren't yours. So
now, what happens after high school? Where do you head off to?
I went to Stetson University down in DeLand, Florida. Great little school. Had a spectacular experience there. Really enjoyed it. Thought I was going to be a doctor. Was always interested in medicine, but I was paying my way through college. Medical school seemed impossible. So kind of pivoted after a couple of years and said, well, how can I get out of here on time? And business degree satisfied that. And I jumped in, and really, I look back now and think how providential that was, that I was going down this path thinking medicine, because I did enjoy it and I was very into it, but business is a much more creative platform for me, and I think a place that I got to do a lot more that I look at it now and think I'm very happy that I ended up here,
right,
by comparison. So had a great experience there. Met my wife when I was in college.
Okay.
That was great. We started dating in school and got married a few years after, and it was I was very fortunate. I ended up in a really good place and made some great lifelong friends. So
yeah, that's fantastic. So what's the first job out of college?
Well, I'd love to tell you a great story about this wonderful job that I got, but I didn't. Being transparent, I was a good student. I was very successful, if you wanted to call it that, in terms of like campus leadership and lots of different things like that. But underneath that, I was very lacking in confidence and a bit insecure about going into the business world. So I sort of jumped on the first job I got, and I got a job in sales with a telecommunications company, and moved to Orlando, Florida. And a buddy that had gone to work there, and he introduced me. And I don't know what I wanted to do at that point, but I landed in a job that was just miserable. Walked in, they handed me a phone book, and they said, start calling people. And I said, what am I selling them? And they're like, well, you'll figure it out. And it wasn't far off this. I didn't have a great experience. And I really, I quickly pivoted and got a little smarter in terms of thinking about what I wanted to do. And I think one of the things I realized is I needed a lot of foundational knowledge of business that I just didn't have. And got connected in with what was a big commercial bank down in Florida at the time, Barnett Bank, and got hired by them. And that led me into doing a lot of corporate banking work. That was an invaluable education. I think at that stage of my career, just to understand how the financial side of the business world sort of powers and manages what happens, I think it was just indispensable knowledge. And then learning how to navigate in the professional world. Bankers is somewhat of a serious job.
Yeah.
So you have to learn how to, mix at a social event and things that I just had never really grown up doing. So had a great experience there, and got caught up in the real estate crash in the late 80s down in Florida. And like many people at the time in the banking world, I was laid off and didn't really have a good sense of what I wanted to do. And again, just kind of happenstance, I knew somebody, and I got introduced into the computer industry, and I went to work at NCR. And that's when things really started to gel. Big company, lot of different things that you get to do there. And they kind of gave me a lot of latitude at a very young age. Just sort of dumped me in there and said, hey, we're going to put you into finance, and then we're going to put you into an operations role. And I got jumped around into a lot of different things, and sort of fast tracked through some things that I think now I would probably say I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none sort of person. But it's because I've sat in sales, I've been in marketing functions, I've been in finance, I've been in operations, I've been in technology. And that was really a great experience to sort of see not just how they work, but how they worked with each other, kind of how all these interdependencies operated. And last job I had there, I was in it was a regional CIO, had a pretty big sweep of responsibility and people and these things at a very young age, and didn't really see a path. I didn't really look out into the future and say, gosh, I want to be like the people ahead of me. I don't know where this is taking me, and sort of opened myself up to making a change, and was recruited to come to Atlanta and join a technology company here. It was a Microsoft partner company, and take a job as a CIO in that smaller growing organization and be an entrepreneur, see how that would work.
So, and I'm thinking NCR. Now, when I think NCR, I'm thinking ATM machines. It's probably a lot more than that, right?
Quite a bit more. ATMs is a very obvious thing that people know,
Yeah.
but retail, point of sale, scanners in
point of
grocery stores, and big mainframe systems. And, there was a litany of different things that NCR did at the time.
Yeah, but I'm sort of seeing this arc from, probably not a mistake. I mean, anybody here you talking could figure out you could probably sell, anything just by your communication skills. So it's probably not that surprising that was your first job, and also not that surprising that you didn't love it. I mean, most people don't love the first thing, right? You know what I mean? Out of the chute. And of course, that's something we try to talk about on this podcast anyway, is like, it's never all up and to the right anyway. There are other setbacks along the way. So I'm glad you shared some of those kind of struggles right out of the box, and the insecurities and all that. But then the NCR, that's really interesting. How many years total were you at NCR?
I was there for 8.5 years.
Okay, so that's a solid run. And then, but you ended with a CIO job. So they sort of probably get you, you're sort of a sales, banking, kind of put you the finance role. And then, but when I think CIO, I think more technology.
Well, the last role that I had when I was at NCR, I'd just in the process, there's the emergence of technology was sort of coming into the marketplace in ways that had never existed, right? We'd gone from sort of green screens into, client server computing and these things. I had a lot of the responsibility for things that started to land on me, and I was just pretty good with it. So that led to me taking a role where I was a regional CIO for NCR.
Okay.
And so I had a lot of responsibility in terms of being responsible for technology infrastructure. So that was a natural transition to go out into another company into a CIO job. But the maybe the secret of all that, and so this is going to sound self-aggrandizing, but I think one of the things that people would have always said about me at that time was, hey, you're a technology guy, but you don't talk like a technology guy. You sort of speak the language of business. You understand how we think and make decisions. And I never really thought of myself as a pure technologist. I don't know how to program anything.
Right.
And so I landed in a role, and really within about 12, 18 months, I was just sort of chafing at the bit. I felt a little bit constrained. I'd be in leadership meetings, and sort of people wanted my opinion around our technical infrastructure and technology, but they didn't really want me to speak into corporate strategy or how we were positioning ourselves in the market or what our product mix was. And I was interested in all of those conversations, and I was having a little trouble staying in my lane, candidly. And it just came to be very self-evident that I needed to go do something else, but I didn't know what that was. And
so this Microsoft partner business comes along, right? But you mentioned that was entrepreneurial. So what was going on? How big a opportunity was that? Were you running that? What did that look like?
Well, no, this is where I was a CIO in that job.
Yeah.
And so I was helping with the strategic direction of the company, but clearly I was working with a leader who was CEO and founder, and it wasn't a large company. It was 70 employees, very high quality technology organization that was implementing some of the very first and most aggressive versions of email platforms, things that we all take for granted today. We were really on the bleeding edge of a lot of that for some very, very large companies, but it was, it was just a smaller organization than I was accustomed to. Didn't have the same complexities, and I'd learned how to navigate in a big environment and sort of understood how to do that. And when there's 5 of us in a room and we get to make all the decisions, it doesn't quite work the same way. But I had a great experience there. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what not to do, even on my side. It was important. I had to be a good follower in that environment, and I was chafing and I think sort of wanting to lead things in my own direction, and that wasn't healthy for the organization. And so I think I overstepped a few times, and it became very obvious to me to look at it and say, I'm not adding the right value here, and I'm not happy here. I think I had to learn at that point, this is a question that you always have to ask, which is, I'm here and I'm placed under the authority of this leader inside the organization. I was reporting to the CEO. And if I'm going to choose to pull myself from out of that authority, right, what I'm saying is I can't stay here. Right. Either I have to sit under that authority and respect that authority, or I can't stay. And I mean, in many ways, that's a bigger, more fundamental question we all have to sort of answer for ourselves, which is, am I willing to sit under any authority in life? And I think when I came to the point where the problem wasn't with that person in authority, the problem was with me, and I have to go and figure out sort of what I want to do. And this isn't a fit. My wife, we just had our 3rd child, and this was the worst possible time you can think to go start your own business. But I decided to hang out a shingle and go be a consultant with no idea whatsoever what that meant.
So when you started your own business, I mean, how many years total? You said, what was it, 8+ at NCR?
Yeah, I was probably, I want to say I was maybe about 32 at the time.
So you did a couple of more years. You did a couple of more years with this Microsoft partner. Is that right?
I did. And then
so it was smaller, right? NCR, I'm thinking big.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm thinking, we got the 70-person deal, but you're still having the same kind of issue, right? Where you're not able to maybe speak into everything. Am I getting it right?
Yeah. I'm a very global kind of thinker, very macro in the way I see the world.
Yeah.
I have to watch that, and I'm kind of the guy that if you ask me for the time, I want to talk about the concept of time, and nonsense, right? So I have to really sort of hone in, and but yeah, it was a great place to cultivate a view from a different level, at the entrepreneurial level of a smaller company, and sort of understand the stresses and strains of what makes that happen, which was also very useful.
Okay, so
And
now you're still pretty young in starting a consulting business. What was your pitch? What was the kind of the business idea? Like, what were you going to sell people?
yeah.
How are you going to get gigs? And what was your product, if you will?
Yeah, well, I'm embarrassed to say this now. It was so naive at the time, but I really had the idea that I was going to go be a virtual CIO. I was going to
Okay,
find small to
no, that's
mid-market
fine.
companies that didn't really understand sort of the intersection of technology to business, and I could be that guy. I wasn't I'm going to tell you how to program systems or write software, but I'm here to help you identify how to get value from technology so that it advances your strategic objectives as a business, right? That was the pitch. And it landed well. I mean, I went right out the door, and within the first 2 weeks of sort of hanging out a shingle, I had a couple of big clients, and stayed busy for several years. And it was fantastic. I think what the quick realization that I came to is that as I was getting involved in these companies, and I'm saying, hey, let's talk about what you're trying to do with technology, I was less interested in that than, well, we can't answer the technology problem because you have a strategic direction problem, or because you have a culture problem within your leadership team, or because you have 1,000 other different things. And so I was so consumed with the fact that, well, that problem over there is really what's driving this problem here, that I just kept sort of putting my toes into all these other areas of the business. And it very quickly, just without any deliberate thought on my part, it just morphed into, I'm really a strategic consultant to these organizations around these larger questions that they have. And I sort of dropped any communication or language that even focused on technology as a conversation, and just focused on helping companies solve complex strategic issues.
So this is, I think this is a kind of a neat arc as you're telling the story. Like the pieces start falling together for me, at least, and I'm sure everybody listening, where it's like, I mean, as self-aware as we can be coming out of college, which, I mean, for most people is limited. I mean, you only have so much experience, all right? You get the first jobs, you sort of figure out, like, wait, not everybody thinks like I do. And it can be a problem in the job that you're supposed to do, but then you keep sort of expanding, one step out. Okay, sales, not just sales, finance. Okay, well, not just finance. CIO, but I'm seeing all these other issues. Okay, I'll be an outsourced CIO, so I could do it for multiple people, so I'm not limited to just one. Wait, I still have to see these other areas. All right, you know what? Let me just be a full-blown consultant and talk about all the strategy, because it seems like maybe your gift is finding what the big issue is that turns the crank, instead of maybe the little things that people tend to play with in the corner. Is that a fair assessment, or how would you?
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty good diagnostician. I think
there
I'm
you
pretty
go.
good at sort of, removing myself and bringing some level of objectivity, and being able to see enough of the detail to pick up the pattern, signal in the noise sort of thing. So yeah, it felt very natural for me to do that. But you made an interesting statement earlier, which was, people don't think like me. I didn't see that as a positive thing.
Right.
I mean, I was like, but what's wrong with me? I don't.
Right.
Everybody wants to talk about this. They're over here like fixated on this little small object in the
Right.
corner, and I'm over here saying, well, what about all these other things? And then everybody kind of looks at me like I have two heads. And I did have a mentor at that point that said, listen, it doesn't take a genius to figure out how or what the problem is, and maybe even how to solve it. The genius is in getting people to listen to your opinion on it. And that landed really, really heavily with me. I just thought, gosh, I've got to cultivate an ability to communicate and influence for the benefit of the people I'm trying to influence. And I'm not doing it very well, because, things that I'm saying and the way I'm communicating, the way I express myself, or how I think and see the world, seems very, very obvious to me, but they're not seeing it through the same lens. And that honestly was sort of where the next sort of crisis in my life came. Was I worked with these clients, I had great success with these clients, wonderful projects, and they ended, and I landed another huge agreement with a company in Birmingham, and I was excited to get started with that. And I was literally driving the morning of September 11th, 2001. I was in my car driving to pick up someone I brought in to be a partner in the deal, and heard the news about the tragedy in New York, and so that trip didn't happen. There was period of great uncertainty. That consulting engagement never happened. The world sort of fell apart, and I went a very long period of time where I didn't make any money. I didn't, I've been fortunate to be very successful up to that point. I had some resources, but year and a half, I'm starting to burn through the margin in life, and got to a point of really being pretty desperate. I've got a wife, I got 3 kids, I got responsibilities, and I can't pay the rent. I mean, I can't pay my mortgage.
This is 9/11/01. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. And so into 02 and the beginning of 03, it was just horrible. And I really had to just humble myself. And I thought, well, I can do something. And I happened to talk to someone one day who said, hey, I need a website. I thought, well, I had to build a website for myself. And I thought, well, how hard could it be? So I went to the bookstore and I bought a book on writing HTML and building websites. And I built one for myself, and I showed it to them, and they said, wow, this is great. Can you build one for our law firm? And, I thought, sure. And he said, well, how much? And I threw out a number that just seemed like egregious and ridiculous. And he said, yes. So I did that. And so for about 9 months, I just did web development and literally would have to read the manual to do every little thing I was going to do, but somehow I managed to limp through. And it was a game of survival. It was a game of just keeping the lights on and feeding the family, and not losing.
I think this is actually an important lesson, because there's somebody out there having that problem right now listening to this,
Right.
where things are not going the way they had dreamed in their head. And it's funny. I had lunch with one of our interns at Arcos today, and his dad's an entrepreneur and friend of ours. And he said, everybody sort of, thinks about the success that some entrepreneurs have, and they don't think about the struggle. He goes, I remember when we didn't have any furniture in our house and things were not going well. You know what I mean? It's not all a panacea. That I don't think I know an entrepreneur who hasn't had a meaningful setback along the way at some point. So how did you kind of dig out of that hole? I mean, one foot at the time, one foot in front of the other, it sounds like, but then it sounded like obviously it built over time. So what was
I think I want to add another wrinkle in here for you, because in the middle of all this, I am struggling with just terrible, crippling anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
And I saw that as I'm just freaking out because my circumstances were
right.
What I did not realize at the time is that I was dealing with a physiological panic anxiety disorder. And it got to the point where, I would have said I was probably, I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but I wasn't far from that place because I couldn't get it to stop. And, faith wasn't solving that problem for me. I was praying and trusting and doing all these things. And it was a medical physiological problem. And when I finally was able to get help, to see a counselor, to get on some antidepressants, it's not an exaggeration to say saved my life.
Wow.
At the same time, I did think I had kind of this inherent worldview that I brought into every situation, which is it's not going to go well. It's not going to go my way. I'm going to have to be perfect. I can't make mistakes, because anything I do that's wrong, it's going to fall apart and the whole world is going to collapse around me. Which, you take that and you take somebody who's already physiologically predisposed to something, it is a really bad combination. And so, the solution to that was really twofold. It was, I didn't have the choice. I hear stories, people saying, I was depressed and I laid in bed for a year and a half. I didn't have that option. I had a wife that was home with 3 children, and I had to get up. And I remember, I sat in meetings and, on the outside probably looked pretty calm and settled. And in the inside, I was just losing my mind. But listen, I don't have a choice right now. I have to be here and I have to be present for this moment. And really just sort of slowly was able to grind out of that. The medication helped, the circumstances, and then some just gracious, generous people around me coming alongside and saying, hey, I know somebody that might need what you have, and probably not because that person's need was as great as my need to have a client,
Right.
but I was able to land in some places, and those engagements went well. And all of a sudden, the flywheel starts turning, and within a few years, I land some major clients. I flew all over the world with a couple of them. I was going back and forth to Europe twice a month, handling some, really, really significant, corporate restructure projects. I mean, I went from sort of this, I'm sitting in rooms doing some really important things, and I'm thinking to myself, if you only knew 2 years ago, I was building websites and not knowing how to do it. I mean, it's almost comical, the juxtaposition of these two places, and you just realize, I thought, man, I didn't put myself here, right? I'm so fortunate to be here. I didn't put myself here. I'm very blessed, and I need to steward. For whatever reasons, I'm going to find myself in this place where I get to have a voice with people that are doing important things, and they've got a lot of responsibility in their life. And I thought I had two duties at that point. One is I got to be transparent about myself and my circumstances, and then I've got to be willing to sort of speak honest truth to them. And I'll tell you a great story. I was with a gentleman who had just taken a job as a CEO of a company. He was out in St. Louis, and flew into town to meet with him. And he said, I just bought a new house. My family's not here yet. I got this brand new house. I want to show it off. Can you come over? And I'll open a bottle of wine, and I want to give you the tour. I mean, he was just so excited to share his new house with me. And so we're walking around this beautiful place and sitting having a glass of wine. And all of a sudden, I just got this incredibly strong feeling like, I got to tell this guy like the garbage of me being a depressed mess and all this. I was like, that's the last thing I want to do. He's paying me a lot of money to have it together, and I don't have it together, and I need to tell him. And I thought, this is incredibly unwise. Don't do this. And I did. I couldn't look at him. And I just said, hey, I don't know why, but I feel very compelled to tell you this story. And I just couldn't even look at him. I sort of had my eyes averted. And I sort of told it all, the unvarnished, ugly mess of it. And I sort of got to a point of stopping, and I just sat there for a second, and I looked over. He was silent. I looked over, and he's just ugly crying. He's a mess. And he said, you just described me. That's where I am in my life right now.
Wow.
And I just decided at that point, I'm never going to be unwilling to just be that transparent and vulnerable with people. And I have learned. I mean, one of the things that I gained out of going through that experience, and then, things rose up and they got great. We built a business, and I merged it with another business, and we sold it to Price Waterhouse in 2010. And, hallelujah, all kinds of good stuff. Right. And then I went out and started my own thing again, because I can't not do it, I guess. But in the middle of all that, I really learned that everybody that I've ever worked with in any company at any level, there's something. Everybody's carrying around this burden, this pain, this insecurity, this fear. And the work that I get to do now, very often, if there's anything amazing about it, is that I sit with people and they tell me these things. And then they realize that, yeah, I'm also messed up. We're all good. And I didn't have, I didn't have money to give. I couldn't be charitable in that season of my life because I didn't have any money. I was barely, keeping the lights on. So I just would give time and give mentoring and give one-on-one, and, sometimes just volunteer myself to even consult people at no charge because they couldn't afford it, because they were in a place of desperation. And, that's a form of generosity I think we need to consider, which is, if you're blessed with an abundance of finances, you can put that to work to do amazing things for the people around you, whether that's in your company or outside or in other places. If you're blessed with an abundance of struggle, oddly enough, you can put that to work. I mean, kind of supposed to put it all to work. And it was awkward. I mean, there's been times I've shared that, and people have kind of looked at me like, yeah, I don't think I'd have told that story. But I just don't think that's something to hold back, because I can't tell you the number of people of some significance, people that are very publicly known figures that I've gotten to work with, that, in the privacy of conversations, have been very transparent to admit to a a litany of struggles, whether struggles with family, struggles in marriages, struggles in health, struggles in, their emotional state or the state of their business, or, 1,000 other things. And so, my job is, I'm not a therapist, but my job is a lot about really helping connect with people and helping them to sort through the complexities of their current situation so that they can get where they really want to get.
What strikes me, Randy, in this is, it just sort of hit me. You use the word transparency, and I was thinking, I pulled out my little, a buddy of mine made this for me as a turtle on a fence post. You're saying, 1 month you're making a website, and the next month you're flying to Europe to do a restructuring, and nobody gets there on their own. I always get that because I'm like, no, but none of us get there on our own. You're a consultant. So you're always trying to, you're selling basically a team, but do you think it's helpful? This word transparency is just ringing in my ears right now. By you being transparent about your own life issues, I mean, can we really solve any problem if we're not just transparent about what the problem is? Like, if you don't want to admit weakness in your personal life, do you want to admit weakness at work? Sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, it seems like maybe that helps you unlock getting down to the root problem, maybe even in corporations, because it's just, what are companies? They're just made up of people anyway. I mean, are those things connected somehow for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the question.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it's attached to our worldview, right? If my worldview is that other people are my adversaries, and I treat, difficulty and stress and adversity, and I treat all these things as threats rather than opportunities to solve problems, right? Then I am going to perceive everything as, the worst thing that I could possibly do is be transparent about anything that feels like weakness on my side, because you're going to use it to your advantage against me. And I think a lot of us walk through the world with that perspective in mind, right? That everything's a threat, everything's fear, and I got to get mine while I can get it. And it's really only when we kind of get to that point where I just kind of rip the band-aid off and say, hey, I'm just going to let go, right? I'm going to put my faith in a bigger idea, which is that belief that at the heart of people is a desire to actually experience things that are real. And people don't look at you with the same perfectionistic expectations you look at yourself. And so, can I just be transparent? Can I just be vulnerable with you? And in doing so, you actually learn to trust me. I've heard it said that the person who best describes reality without emotion wins. Wins is probably the wrong word, but a lot of what I do when I think about the responsibility that I carry when I'm working with a group, my job is just to describe reality. My job is just to come in and say, the unvarnished reality of your situation is this. I know you hold on to this hope, and it might be the hope that my wayward child is going to come back and take over my company and run it for me in the future, or the hope that this Hail Mary pass, I'm going to land this deal that's going to be the salvation of our business, even though, it's not realistic for that to happen. And by the way, I've seen amazing, miraculous things happen where those things came through. But sometimes it's just for us to be real and say, hey, the way we're going to win is we're going to win by majoring on the majors. We're going to work the fundamentals of a business. We've got to think about the culture that we're creating. We got to think about the people that we're bringing in. We got to think about the way we're treating the customers that we serve in the market. And if we're starting to do those things well, even the most mundane business can become incredibly impactful. And we can experience a different kind of success with what we do. But we've got to, I mean, you're saying, I'm going to trust that if I put the right things out there, that the right things are going to sort of come back to me. And most people, and I'm going to say that, I mean, it sounds pretty cynical to make that statement that way, but most people struggle to believe that could be true.
So, okay. So I have this picture of, again, obviously this is the Generous Business Owner podcast. And I like the way you described all these different ways of being generous. Obviously I kind of like this idea of where's your abundance, is it with money? Is it with time? Is it with advice? Is it with just sharing? I think a big one for you is sharing your own struggle and letting other people maybe have permission to share theirs. And then, by the way, I actually think it makes you better at your job, because now you can, as you say, get to the root of the problem and identify reality. So that's helpful for you to kind of get to that problem. And then when, like, if you have, somebody, another guest on the podcast as a client, and they're like, I'd like also to be more generous with my platform. What's kind of some of the advice that you give to some of your clients? Like, how do they have a more positive giving attitude in their business?
Yeah, it's interesting. I meet some that they're just extraordinary at it. They're just,
Yeah.
it's like everything just exudes out of them, this natural desire just to sort of pay into the world to everybody
Yeah.
around them, whether it's with their money or whatever it might be. I see them, and I'm always amazed at them because it is so unique to
Yeah.
experience people that are just sort of wired that way naturally. But what I found is that if you sit with almost any business leader and you say, do you have a desire to be a generous person? Do you have a desire to pay into the world? The desire is absolutely there. I mean, the issue in our lives is not that we don't aspire to these things. It's that the things that we value and we think are important compete. They always do. I mean, I can say, I want a company that values honesty. I want a company that values family. I want a company that values lifestyle balance. I want a company that values getting results for our stakeholders or shareholders, right? And every one of those things, when you might be interviewing somebody to come work at your company and you share that, no one's going to say, oh, you value excellence. That's not my thing. But you've hired plenty of people, and at some point you've realized it's not their thing. The truth is, it is. It's only their thing once they've satisfied other priorities or values in their life. Like, I value my downtime. And so I'll be excellent, but only to the degree that doesn't interfere with that. Whereas you have other people that say, I value excellence to the degree that if it means I've got to pull an all-nighter in order to keep a commitment to somebody, I'll do whatever it takes, right? We obviously don't want people to be in a position of having to do that. But I think when people start to think about, I want to be generous, I think you have to sort of come to grips with the idea that it's not a sacrifice you make once you have so much that you don't miss it. It's a sacrifice you make when you don't have so much. But I believe that there's an eternal economy with that, and that you really just can't outgive that. When you're giving generously, when you give information to competitors in the marketplace because you become friends with them and you say, hey, here's something you need to know, right? You might seem like you're sabotaging yourself, but you're building goodwill and currency and trust in the marketplace. You're demonstrating something that's an internal character that starts to reflect in everything that you do. When you're generous towards your employees, that doesn't mean that you go and you grossly overpay people. That's not always a help to them. That can be very destructive to people. But it says that I have a spirit of generosity towards them so that I don't see their failures or their mistakes as things that steal from me. I see it as, well, this is just part of the process, right? It's part of us, caring about them. And if you believe that, what you find is that after you practice that for a while, all of a sudden you start to sort of, it creates this gravity. And this gravity starts to pull all kinds of other generosity to you. People that come out of the woodwork, they say, I want to help. For years, I believed in being a referrer. And I don't mean a passive referrer. If you came to me and said, Randy, do you know somebody who can help me do X? Oh, yeah, I'll call that person. But to sit with someone and say, hey, I see a need here for you, and I know somebody that I really trust. Yeah. I think I need to put you guys together, right? And I will tell you that overwhelmingly that you do that and nothing comes back directly.
Right.
But I've also been in business now for a long, long time, 25 years. And in 25 years, I don't seek clients. The phone just rings. It just right. All of a sudden someone calls me up and says, I got your name. I heard about you, or somebody said I need to meet with you. And it just opens up this really interesting world. But it's not you don't put your coin in the slot and pull the lever and get a toy out of the bottom. I mean, you've got to sort of put it out there and really believe that as you put it out there, it has this ability to sort of shift.
One thing that also hit me as you were talking about that, I love that idea of like, it's a good business strategy actually to be generous, and it will come back in ways that you don't expect. So don't think it's a some kind of a vending machine, cosmic vending machine. But the other thing I like is, we started this conversation by talking about God gave you this sort of weird ability to see the big problem in the room. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I like that you said in that was, if you don't prioritize it, and I'm obviously restating it, but if you don't prioritize, it's not going to happen. So if you tell me you want to be generous, and then we get into the business meeting and you got all these other things you're doing, and there's nothing in there about behaving in a way that you set as a priority, mm-hmm. That's a problem, right? So you have to prioritize it first, and then, watch what happens. I mean, it's going to be pretty cool. Right?
Yeah, it is. Well, so you hit on something that's kind of a fun experience that I'll oftentimes sit down with a company that I'm starting to work with for the first time, and they'll want to tell me, let us tell you a little bit about our values. Let us tell you who we are.
Right. Exactly.
Before you do that, why don't you let me just spend some time with your company and meet with some of your people, and then let me tell you what I think they are.
Oh, that's so good. Before you read them or are told.
And let me tell you, you want to talk about something that strikes fear in the heart of most people. They go, whoa. Well, you know, we're still working on these. We're working on them.
Right. They're aspirational.
They're aspirational. I'm not coming in here to tear you down.
Right.
I am trying to reflect to you in a way that's sort of independent of your own aspirational desires or the way you want to see yourself through the best lens. To say, hey, if objectively I, as an outsider, might see it that way, what are your partners and customers and vendors and employees, and what does the community think about you? If I get this impression, do they also see the same thing?
That's awesome. I think that's a perfect segue into, as we sort of wrap up our time, what you and I were talking before we started recording about it. It's just like you and I having lunch here, and I'm asking you a bunch of questions, and then our friends get to be blessed by the conversation. But we're just a couple of business people talking about this thing and trying to get better at using our platform for generosity and encourage other people to do the same. And we don't have all the answers, but what's just some practical tip you would leave the listeners with to, a little something maybe behind you on the path, that a little something they could wake up and try to do tomorrow to get a little better at leveraging their platform in a generous way?
Yeah. So like a bunch of things popped into my head all at once. I'm going to give you one sort of big picture, and I'm going to give you one practical.
Perfect.
The big picture is sort of the philosophical point, which is simply this. At the root of any struggle to truly be generous is ultimately a lack of faith. And so if you're struggling to be generous, the problem isn't a question of generosity. The problem is a question of faith. That you have lost sight of the identity of your Father in heaven, from my point of view. That's really the root of the problem, right? This is what you need to go wrestle with, and that's who you need to go wrestle with. You need to sit in front of God, and you got to wrestle with that question there. That's the place to answer that. But I think that there's a small step of generosity that a person can take that isn't just an economic step, that is really interesting in that it does pay a pretty immediate dividend. And I think it hits at the heart of a challenge that we are experiencing in a broader cultural sense right now. And it's simply this: mentor somebody. Just mentor somebody. And people will say, well, gosh, I don't know how to do that. No, I know. So what? Okay, if you don't know how to do it, to do it badly until you can do it well, but do it. Because maybe the most powerful thing that has helped shape and form me as I've gone along in my career is that when I was 30, I had a couple of guys that were younger than me that said, hey, you seem to have done some things. You're down a path. Will you help me? I had people say, hey, I like your marriage. I like the way you manage your kids. Would you meet with me? And they sort of asked me, and I said, well, I don't think I'm qualified to give advice to anybody. I'm not done with any of those jobs, but I'll tell you what I know, and I'll tell you what I feel like I'm struggling with. And just did that over and over. And then professionally, that's the case. And really, I mean, all I do is get paid to mentor now. I mean, that's all consulting is. And I still, I meet if you ask my wife what I do for a living, she would say breakfast and lunch, because it's just nonstop meeting with people. I had lunch today with a guy that I've really enjoyed getting to know. And we just sort of met somewhere out about town, and we meet once a month and we get lunch and we talk about where he's going with his career and what he's doing in his life and how he's growing. And I think there's this scarcity of people who are just willing to say, hey, I'll give the time. I'll just give you the time to be there, to walk through life. And I'll be okay with the fact that I'm not going to have the answers. And I'll be okay with the fact that this isn't about giving you direction for how you should do things. I think that if we raised our hand and said, how many people here want somebody that they can go to who genuinely cares about their success and well-being in all aspects of their life, and who's just willing to partner with them to be there through that? I don't think there's a person in America that wouldn't say, yeah, actually, if there was somebody like that for me, I would take it. And most of us don't have that.
I love it. Find somebody to mentor. Well, you've given us plenty of wisdom. Randy, I'm going to put in a plug. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk too much about one of your books called Roadmap to Remarkable, and one that's coming up to be released soon, Hidden in Plain Sight. So we'll put some that in the show notes so people can find those if they're interested in hearing more. But Randy, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you having me. It's fun to share.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Please leave us your rating and reviews, share it with a friend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.